The first permanent British colony that was established in 1583 was the Virginia colony. Europeans came to America believing they could get rich. Most of them were businessmen. Of course, the land was already occupied by Native Americans, and they didn't really get along with them.
Then came the winter of 1609 to 1610, what the Virginian settlers called the Starving Time.
The settlers were driven through insufferable hunger to eat those things which nature most abhorred. They went to eating the excrements of humans and their flesh, eating corpse as well to survive.
The survivors never wanted to go back to that. They needed a way to grow food and make money. Tobacco made a lot of profit, but they were too lazy to work.
They couldn't use Indians because they were tough, resourceful, defiant, and at homes in these woods.
White servants were expensive, they were not permanent, and there weren't enough of them. Blacks had already been brought from Africa to South America and the Caribbean to the Portuguese and Spanish colonies to work as slaves. Blacks already being a regular source of labor, they seemed to be the answer.
Europeans saw Africans as less than them because of their tribal life and style culture, but their kingdoms were very strong and their culture was advanced in their own way.
According to numerous accounts from European settlers, the Africans were very civil and good-natured people.
Though Africans were skilled in many areas, their weapons were not as strong as European guns and ships. This made it easier for the Europeans to capture them.
African tribal life had more kindness in law and punishment, while during that time period, European laws were so brutal a child could be hanged for stealing a rug.
Although Africans enslaved their own, it was different because the slaves had more rights and usually became part of the family. American slaves had little to no rights and rarely ever became family.
Another difference is African slaves were not worked to death because of the owner's endless greed and desire for money.
Final difference is African slavery wasn't fueled by discrimination and hatred because of the color of a person's skin or the belief that a black man was less than a white man.
The Africans were taken from their homes and was forced to walk 1,000 miles, shackled around the neck, under whip and gun. These walks that killed 2 of every blacks were called death marches.
They would then be put in cages, branded and examined. Inside the ship, they would be chained together in coffin-like spaces where they would suffocate in slave deck that was so covered with blood mucus that resembled a slaughterhouse.
Many of the slaves on the ships would rather die than continue suffering, so they committed suicide. 1 of every 3 blacks transported overseas died. All of these developments led to the first slave ship to North America in the year 1602.
Arrival in America made it even more apparent that blacks were different than whites. If a white servant and a black slave both ran away, a white servant would have to work longer while the slave would stay one forever.
There were many cases where the master or overseer would rape a slave to get free slaves. If this was ever caught, the slave would be whipped while the master publicly apologized.
In European history, the color black has always been associated with evil and darkness. Of course, this was no excuse to subjugate an entire race of people, especially since the color was on another human being's skin.
Poor white servants and black slaves couldn't care less about race. If white people in the same situation as black people don't think less of them, racism can't be natural.
Roger Douglas gets insights on how blacks were treated. The children were separated from their family at birth. They weren't told their age either. Slaves barely got any food, and what they got was terrible.
Slave children only got 1 ragged piece of clothing for an entire year. They slept on the damp floor with a thin blanket and didn't get much sleep. If they didn't wake up on time, they'd be whipped.
Slaves tried to resist, sometimes running away and hiding in the mountain. Slaves also tried to burn and destroy crops, homes, and buildings. It didn't happen often, but when they could, slaves would try to kill their master. The slave shows their resistance in small ways too, stealing things, being lazy, pretending to be dumb or sick. The subtle forms of resistance was to give themselves dignity as human beings.
Created using Powtoon.